introduce Bob Bolton. Bob is, Bob is many things. He is a hydrologist, permafrost hydrologist, but I say that he also dabbles quite successfully in everything from vegetation ecology to some very interesting work just related to permafrost in particular, some of which he'll be talking about today. Bob is a research faculty at University of Alaska Fairbanks and among other things affiliated with IARC, or the International Arctic Research Center. Instead of giving you more of a welcome than that, Bob, or a standard introduction, what I'd like to do instead is to point everybody on this call to something that Bob isn't going to be talking about today, but I think is really interesting and great work and relevant in many ways to these collaboration teams. And that's some work that Bob has been doing in a project called Alaska Voices. I'll put the link to the website for Alaska Voices in the chat here a little bit later. But this is a fantastic project, very much in line with the StoryCorps project that many of you may be familiar with through NPR and other places, and in fact was helped get up and running with assistance from the StoryCorps folks. And it records basically stories about people living and working in Alaska, including a fair number of scientists that are part of that as well. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that. Some great stuff on there, some very interesting perspective on working in Alaska and the Arctic. And again, I will place that in the chat. With that, I think I'll just hand it over to Bob. And thanks so much for coming and talking about your work with thermokarst modeling, Alaska Thermokarst Model, and so forth. And really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So thanks, Bob.
All right, thank you, Steve. Can everybody see that? Is it full screen? And
yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, Stephen. Thank you for plugging the Alaska Voices project. That's been a really cool and fun experience, and we're putting together new podcasts. So hopefully, will be coming out next month to bridge into February and bridge into the post-COVID era when we can start recording people again. So I appreciate that. But that's not why I'm here today. I'm here to talk about some thermokarst modeling and a part of the Alaska Thermokarst model that I've been thinking about and working on for a little while now, and present some of those results in some new work that's just coming forward as well. I do want to acknowledge a number of people that have helped me and talked with me and collaborated with me and worked through some problems with me for a number of years. And those are Ross Spicer, Vladimir Romanowski, Helene Gannett, Mark Lara, and Chuck Abelt of Los Alamos. Most people are from UAF, and Mark's now in Illinois. And so I'll just start out. This isn't probably too surprising to anybody, but just northern permafrost, it covers a large part of the land. It has a lot of carbon, and the carbon amount, release rate, and form of carbon releases are known, but it is tied to permafrost thaw. And I'm showing you a map here in the bottom right-hand corner. Most of the work that I'm going to be talking about is on the Arctic tundra part, the northern part, but I am also going to present some data from the Seward Peninsula just to give you an idea of where we're at and what I'm talking about. Permafrost thaw and permafrost degradation has a number of implications and impacts, including societal impacts and changes of degradation, infrastructure issues. This photo up in the top right corner is right behind the building I'm sitting in, a sinkhole caused by ice wedge melting out, and these are popping up around the backside of UAF here, pipelines, buildings falling apart. Changes in the ground surface, and changes in habitat as you move from low center polygons and wet areas to high center polygons. And so we've been working on the Alaska Thermokarst model for a number of years, and we are asking two primary questions. First one is, what are the consequences of thermokarst on land cover trajectory? And this includes all the things I just mentioned. And the second question is, how will thermokarst disturbance affect carbon, water, and energy dynamics at the regional scale? And so down here in this lower panel, we see changes in energy budget, changes in carbon budget, and changes in water distribution and routing are all impacted by thermokarst and landscape degradation. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this part, but the Alaska Thermokarst model is a state in transition model and is based on frame-based methodology to track cohorts or ecotypes, which represent unique land units. We track by fractional area of a model element, and it's not spatially explicit. We try to model on a 1 kilometer resolution with 1 year time steps, and we're trying to go model out to the year 2100 eventually. The landscape transitions include the Arctic tundra, which I primarily work and think about, boreal forest, and lakes. And so, as I mentioned, the model is based upon frame logic. And so in the upper left-hand corner here, we start with the parent cohort. So this could be a wetland tundra, low center polygon. And it goes through a series of questions of where you might end up in the same state after a year, or you might end up with a different type of landscape or ecotype. But the question that I'm going to talk about today are these first two questions. Is the thermokarst active, and is there a pulse event? What I'm thinking about is, what is the cause, what is the initiation, or what may initiate thermokarst and the process of landscape degradation? We know that thermokarst occurs, but it doesn't occur uniformly, and trying to figure out what those trigger events may be if it's not some sort of massive trigger event like a wildfire event, for example. And so this idea of climate priming came from some of our work with the NG Arctic project out on the Seward Peninsula. And in the 2018 and 2019 winters, field seasons, we experienced extremely warm summers, which were followed by early and deep snow, which was able to trap that summer heat, and warm winter temperatures. In the following year, many of our permafrost sites out on the Seward Peninsula did not completely freeze. And so here, showing the winter of 2016, 2017, all the ground completely froze. All the liquid water was primarily frozen. In the 2017, 2018 year and the following year, this was not the case at many of our sites. And so the idea is, if the ground doesn't completely freeze and you have the following summer warm temperatures, then the ground doesn't need to go through phase change of the ice crystals within the active layer, and you might be able to start penetrating into the deeper permafrost soils, and then maybe you start initiating some of the thermokarst and landscape degradation processes. And so this is an example here of what this sort of generated, the idea generated. And so these are 5 hypothetical years, and what I was wondering, are there times throughout the climate period or from season to season where we experience abnormally warm summer temperatures and significantly different snowpack conditions or deeper snowpack conditions, and winter temperatures, are they mild? And if all the pluses, in this case like in year 2, if all the pluses align, then maybe we have years where thermokarst may be initiated and go forward. On the other hand, if we have years where it's not conducive to permafrost thaw or thermokarst development, these might be years where you might have cold summer temperatures, no snow, so the ground is able to freeze back, and these might be periods where the ground and thermokarst process is actually halted, or at least slowed down from its current rate. And so these are what we're looking at in terms of, that's what we're thinking about when I think about climate priming, the seasonal conditions that cumulatively add up to conditions that may trigger thermokarst. And so the method of this is that we looked at using data from the SNAP team here at UAF, the Scenarios Network for Alaska and Arctic Planning. We looked at long-term historical averages of summer temperature, which is expressed as thawing degree days, early snow, which is expressed as precipitation in October and November, the total snowpack, which is expressed as precipitation in October through March, and then the winter temperature freezing degree days, expressed as freezing degree days. And so I have those long-term averages here in the left-hand column of images for northern Alaska. And then for each year from 2001 through 2015 is what we've done to this point. We determined the percent departure from these long-term averages. And then we stack these departures and basically sum up the departures. And so the climate priming index, what I call an index, is basically just the total percent departure from the long-term average of the normals. And there's an example here of 2004 climate priming map. And so if we do this for a number of years, what we're able to do is identify the climatic conditions where thermokarst and landscape degradation may occur. So we have a spatial and temporal positioning of where the landscape may be most susceptible to initiation of thermokarst. But as we know, that's just part of the story. You also need the ground conditions to be suitable for thermokarst to occur. And a number of years ago, Helene Gannett produced this thermokarst predisposition model, which expresses the proportion of the landscape where thermokarst could initiate and expand. It doesn't say thermokarst will expand or will initiate, but it says where, if thermokarst does happen at this place, at this pixel, where will it, the proportion of the landscape could expand or is vulnerable to that. And so this is based upon the presence of permafrost or no permafrost, the ice content of soils, the physiography upland versus lowland, and the presence of histels or organic layer over permafrost. And so her analysis shows that about 30% of Alaska is predisposed to thermokarst. And this goes on a scale of 0 to 100. What we did is we turned this into a fractional area, and this just shows different points. I'm going to show a couple plots of in a few minutes. But so Barrow has a predisposition of 100 or 1. Ikpikpuk has a predisposition of 10 or 0.1. And I use this as a multiplier. When you take the climate priming without the ground conditions and multiply it by the predisposition model, it changes the results quite dramatically. And so this is the climate priming times the predisposition model as a fraction from 0 to 1. And you can see that in 2011 and 2014 were incredibly warm years, but it wasn't uniformly warm based upon the predisposition model. And so the question that I've had for quite a while is, how do I validate this, this idea in this model? There aren't a lot of studies that go out and say, in this year there was thermokarst, and this year there wasn't thermokarst or degraded. There's no real time series. And I know there's products coming online, and I know that Ben Jones has done some work with lakes, and I know there's different proxies, but I've had a hard time really validating and describing this. In the last few months, Chuck Abbolt at Los Alamos National Laboratory has produced some products that shows a time series at a number of different sites of pooling of water in the polygon troughs. And so his model is going from a low center polygon in pristine conditions, and then the melting out of the ice wedges, and it degrades and degrades, and eventually the troughs start to fill up with water. And so I'm using this as a proxy for permafrost degradation and the thermokarst process and starting. And so here's an example of this, and he's using panchromatic worldview data. And this is at Prudhoe Bay, Alaska. And in 2008, there was about 1% inundation. So the red here is water inundation in the troughs. And I'm looking at the chart, sorry. And then in 2016, there's quite a bit more water. And then he was able to map this over time. So from 2008 through about 2019, you can see significant jumps in the amount of water that's showing up in the landscape. And so I thought this is great. I have a time series of different places on the landscape where I can compare the amount of water on the landscape to the climate priming results. And so I'm just going to go through a couple examples of this. So here's the Prudhoe Bay site, and so the predisposition model is a 1.0. So and what we see, what I'm quite excited about. So here's the 0 is about long-term average. If it was 0, it'd be the long-term average of everything. So everything above is more favorable to degradation, and everything below is halting. And so what we see is that prior to this first peak, there's a significant increase in the climate priming index, or significant departure. And then again, we have another peak here and then another increase there. So I was quite excited about this when I first saw it. The ICPICS puck site has a predisposition of 0.1. And so the dashed line and hollow symbols show what the climate priming is without the multiplier. And then if we multiply by 0.1, then it narrows it down. And here you see that the conditions are quite stable, but there's no real change in the climate priming because the ground conditions are not suitable for thermokarst at this site. It's a sandy site from my understanding. The model isn't perfect for sure, and so here's a couple examples. Nuiqsid 0.98. It seems to have a low fractional cover of ponded water pretty consistently, but there doesn't seem to be any up or down. And then again, here is the Ukqiagvik site, which has predisposition of 1. And again, fractional area of water seems to be quite low and consistently low, no matter how well the climate priming model seems to say there should be more degradation taking place. So there's a lot of unanswered questions, but I was encouraged by some of the results, and I think there's more things that we can do to follow up to validate or invalidate the model. And so this seems to be going pretty quickly. So our current focus and future directions, I'm exploring differences of why I'm seeing these changes in to explore differences between the inundation percentage shown by the satellite images versus the climate priming and the timing of that. This might be an issue of timing of the remote sensing acquisition. Earlier in the season might be a bit wetter with winter snow melt, maybe inundating the land a little bit. I know that the Prudhoe Bay images were later in the season, so yeah, so it's maybe not always. It may not be a perfect proxy. There may be topography effects, including, if the ground is sloped, there may be, the landscape may be degrading, but maybe there's more connections through the troughs, and the landscape is actually able to drain easier than it was before. So you might see a decrease in water or inundation. We need to look more at the historical studies and including lakes, see if these apply to lakes, and see if the lake catastrophic lake drainage. Ben Jones, I know, has done some work in others on this that might lead some clues into the timing, and see if this is a reasonable mechanism for initiation. And then also look at the different thresholds for each of the different sites. Are there different thresholds for different ecotypes? Are the conditions at Ukqiagvik different than those at Prudhoe Bay? And so do you need a higher threshold of a climate priming or climate conditions to trigger further degradation of the landscape? We're also looking at other locations throughout the state, working on the Seward Peninsula, and the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta right now, and also moving forward through time and applying it, going out to 2100 using different climate scenarios. I'd also like some input on different applications, such as maybe wildfire. Could this type of analysis work for planning wildfire or thinking about wildfire or infrastructure planning, pipelines, roads, ports, those sorts of things as the Arctic Ocean starts to open up, or anything else. And so that my contact information is below, and I'm more than happy to take any questions. And that seems like it was a little quick, but hope that's okay.
Thank you, Bob. That's great. Gives us plenty of time for discussion here. We already have two questions in the chat box. Start with one from Helene. Can the standing water detection discriminate permanent versus seasonal inundation?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think the timing of the when the remote sensing image is acquired could have a big impact. We know that in the snow melt, the landscape is flooded in a lot of these places, the flat areas, and then as the sun comes back, the energy, the water leaves due to evaporation and then some seeping into the ground as the ground starts to seasonally thaw. So later in the season, you'd expect a drier landscape than early in the season. So there's definitely that. I also think that topography has a big role in this as well. It could almost have like the opposite impact if you have a slope versus a flatter area.
Another question from Mark Waldrop. Mark, would you just want to ask your question, or would you like me just to read it from the chat?
Well, I was able to find my mute button quickly, so I guess I'll go ahead and ask it. So I was just curious, you know, it seems like I saw some discussion of climate effects on permafrost, and then this map of sort of permafrost vulnerability with a large number of attributes in it. But is the inherent permafrost temperature, sort of current state of permafrost, included in either that map or your model? Obviously, some permafrost is much colder than others, so I'm wondering to what extent is that permafrost that's just at the freezing point shown to be more vulnerable in your model?
And so it's yes and no. And so the stuff that we're doing here and presenting here is just the initiation, just sort of that trigger. But then we also try to calculate simply the seasonal thaw and seasonal active layer, and then we track how deep the active layer or seasonal thaw goes through time. And so we do track that further on in the model, and we do that in terms of the we call it the protective layer, which is sort of the buffer between the land surface and the ice-rich soils. And so once that buffer, so that's where ice-rich soils are basically thawed, and I'm trying to think. And so, but once you get a deep enough buffer layer, then energy won't be able to penetrate into the deeper soils, and that's kind of where you're stuck at. So we do track that. It's not explicit. You know, where the temperature of the permafrost at this point is 0.5 or -5. We don't do that, but we do track it in a different way, sort of tracking it in a different way. I'm not sure if that answered the question.
Yeah, I raised my hand, right? I can ask. Can I ask? It's Vladimir.
Yes, please, Vladimir.
Hey, yeah, a very good presentation, Bob. But yeah, and it's great you developed this kind of potential event of triggering of thermokarst, but really, and actually partially you already answer to my question, just answering to Mark. But the trick part is the presence of this protective layer or transitional layer. according to Yuri and Misha Kanevsky. And I think this is the key to answer when and where this thermokarst will happen. There could be all good conditions for deepening in the active layer, but you don't know if this active layer will reach the top of ice wedges. And unfortunately, there is not much information about the thickness of this protective layer originally. So what do you think? What could be done in this direction? And I will give you some example. On the North Slope, usually this layer is not that, 10 centimeters, 20, not much more. In interior Alaska, to this big ice wedges, late Pleistocene ice wedges, it could be like a meter. So how you plan to map this if it's possible even?
Yeah, I guess my first reaction or first approach to this would be almost backwards calculating using a model like GIPL and using historical data to try to map out, model out what that protective layer could be through spatially, and have that as a baseline sort of approximation anyway. Is my original. I agree with you, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, that could be good solution for some more recent like North Slope, more recent kind of deal of permafrost. But in interior around Fairbanks, it's a paleo actually ice wedges, and in this case you have to really go to, I don't know, Holocene optimum maybe, so conditions of Holocene optimum, and estimate what could be a active layer during that time, plus a new accumulation of sediment, including organic layer during the Holocene. So I mean it's a way to do, but it's a little bit tricky
and complicated.
Yeah, but it's possible. Yeah. It's possible.
Yeah,
but you have to really bring some more specialists like paleogeographers and geologists and quaternary, at least, geologists. But it is possible. It could be done.
Yeah. Thank you for the comment.
We had a question from Jeff Curry about the availability of the vulnerability map. Helene was able to answer that, I think, to some degree in the chat. Did you need to follow up on that, Jeff, or did you get what you needed there?
Nope, I got it, and I'm looking at it right now. Thank you very much.
Excellent, excellent. And then I think next question on the list was from Charles Miller. Do you want to go ahead and just ask your question, Charles?
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Bob, for the very nice presentation. I was wondering if those unusual conditions that you noted at Teller were also observed at the Kugarok and Council watershed sites, and if there was any impact from those conditions on the water chemistry measurements in the following thaw season, particularly if there was an increase in any carbon-14 in the sediments.
I can answer the first part of that question. We did observe that the same conditions out at the Kugarok site and at Council as well. I'm not a chemistry person, and I don't know the impact to the groundwater chemistry at all. I couldn't answer it. Don't know. I just don't know. But I can email Brent Newman at Los Alamos, and he might have a good idea. He does water chemistry for NG.
Yeah. Also, Bob, there's another project. I don't know exactly who it is, but I met them in the field. There is some group from outside of Alaska. They do water chemistry. I met them at Council. So there could be some other projects which are measured this during this time. Yeah. we can figure it out. I think the NG is probably the best first step, but there could be some other people doing it just by coincidence.
Yeah, I'll email Brett.
All right, another question from Mark, and I didn't realize it until Mark asked it, but I was wondering the same thing. What exactly makes up or defines the protective layer that you referred to?
It's from the land surface. This the distance from the land surface to the top of ice-rich soils or permafrost, and so it's basically the deepest current active layer on record. And so where the basically you eliminate the ice from the soils, but it provides a buffer between energy coming into the surface to the deeper soils and permafrost. And so if you have sloughing like off the top polygons into these troughs, you might deepen that protective layer through sediment transfer as well as just thawing of the active layer. And so it becomes deeper and deeper, and it's a buffer and a protection from further degradation of permafrost. Basically, we have thermokarst that starts and it initiates, but eventually it stops, right? And so it's that buffering layer that where energy isn't able to penetrate into the deeper soils, and it's that soil layer that.
And transitional layer, according to Yuri Shur and Misha Kanevsky and others, it's a part of this protective layer, which is actually upper part of permafrost. So what Bob just said, all protective layer is a recent active layer and the part of permafrost, which is above the top of the ice wedge. And that's very, very important, crucially important layer, because it needs to be thawed during the summer to this thawing process get into the ice wedge. So, and they call it transitional layer, I think. And it formed because of, or like Bob says, accumulation for any kind of reason, accumulation of sediment on top of the ground, or because sometimes in the past active layer was deeper than it is right now. So.
I want to make sure that we have time for updates. So I see that Larry Hinsman has raised his hand. We'll take his question, and then there's a question from Sasha Peterson to wrap up the discussion section. Larry, go ahead, please.
I think it's *6 to unmute. We can't hear you, Larry. You're still muted. We should be able to hear you now.
Well, apologies for that, Larry. Not able to hear you. Do you know how to find Bob and I? And I'm sure if you just want to send us your question, that make sure that gets answered. Sasha, you want to go ahead, please?
Yeah, I was just wondering if those climate priming layers that were like from 2006 to 2014 were also available somewhere publicly.
I think they may be. I'm not 100% sure, but if I'm more than happy to give. So you're talking about like the freezing degree days and or are you just looking for climate priming? The stuff that makes up the.
Yeah.
I'm happy to give you whatever you want if you just email me, and if it's not on Snap's site.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. And my contact is there.
Excellent. Good discussion. Great presentation, Bob. Thanks so much. Meredith, I think we can move on now. Just a little time for updates from members or agencies that you represent. Anybody want to kick us off? Anything? First, I'll offer to our colleagues from the Permafrost team any updates, especially things that we might be in a cross-team sense interested in joining you for later in the year. Well, hearing none, I think we may have lost a Permafrost team there. Any other updates people want to join in?
We have one from Ken Hill in the chat noting a new paper published at the Arctic and Alpine Research, which might be of interest. And full article title is Increased Mean Annual Temperatures in 2014 to 2019, indicating permafrost thaw in Alaskan national parks. And there's the link there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. Well, if nobody's going to jump in right here, one thing that I wanted to bring up, not a agency update or anything of that nature necessarily, but just a little bit on the COVID situation in Alaska. I know many of us, myself included, it was a tough loss last year, not being able to be out in the field and attend to everything that we had going on top of all the other difficulties and stresses and really tragedies of last year. The current situation, though, I think it's summed up pretty well for Alaska. There was a recent letter issued by PolarTREC. This is the native corporation for the Bering Strait region. And within that letter, they say a couple of things. It's basically advice to people who are thinking about a field season in 2021. And among other things, in this letter, the PolarTREC Board of Directors says, "We insist that anyone planning to engage with communities in our region be in contact with the appropriate tribal councils, indigenous organizations, and other relevant government or other bodies far in advance of making any plans or arrangements for travel into the region." Also, they go on to say, in addition, we insist that you respect and obey our community's travel mandates. And go on in that vein in a very sincere and in-depth measure. And just all to say to point out again how we really do need to be careful and thoughtful, patient as we're planning our field season, and also being cautious and respectful as we're developing our plans as well, because as it is all across the nation and throughout the world, COVID continues to be a tremendous concern. And that's especially so in rural off-the-road system Alaska. So ask you to consider that. And if you have any questions, if you'd like to see the PolarTREC letter or any other information about the present state of things in Alaska, I would be happy to pass that on to you. And we have a number of other people on this call that are familiar with the situation as well. So I think I'll
Steve, can I ask you
please,
about this
yes.
a little bit? We definitely appreciate and definitely do whatever we can to protect communities. But I just wonder if there were any examples of somebody not following these rules, because the how it's written is kind of harsh, like blaming even somebody. Well, you can blame if somebody did something wrong, right? And my question is, if anybody did something wrong in this area, I mean, somebody didn't contact communities without letting them know or something like this. I just wonder, because we pretty much all of us do really appreciate these concerns.
I am not aware of that being the case. There might be others on the call that are more familiar with the situation, or if there's some background there that I'm missing. My guess is that sort of the tone of that letter reflects the gravity of the concerns within QARC and the communities that QARC represents. But again, I haven't heard anything, though I'd also say that it only takes one bad actor frankly, to destroy what goodwill and trust has been created with many of these communities. So it's doubly important that each of us act in the interest of the research community at large.
Yeah. No, I completely agree, but we also should be sure that we would not blame, on any basis. That's also important. Yeah.
Yeah, and Meredith has shared a link to the letter in the chat if you are interested in seeing that.
And I also wanted to ask Vladimir, while he's here, if he could give us an update on the IAS call for proposals with the February 22nd deadline, I think.
Yeah, well, it's traditional that there is some small amount of money, up to 5,000 per proposal, could be submitted to organize. Most of this money goes to kind of seed money to organize workshops or working groups. There was diversity in the previous years, that it's not only workshops. It could be one of them, very good one actually was this permafrost cartoons. So there was some diversity of different projects were funded, but yeah, that's every working group in IASC, and there is terrestrial working group, which is I'm representing, I think, here. We will discuss this and grant, I would guess, up to probably 4 projects this year. But what is necessary to show that it's really international kind of collaboration. It should be involved international collaboration. It should be not just kind of one very specific question. It should be more integrative kind of proposals. And actually, there's 2 types of projects. It could be one specifically for terrestrial group, and one is cross-cutting theme with the atmosphere group, cryosphere group, and also human dimension group. So that's two different type of proposals, and together I think about 20,000, maybe no, actually it will be more than that, will be distributed for those small proposals. So usually it's about 3 or 4 funded by terrestrial group, and about maybe another 4 with help with other working groups in IASC, these cross-cutting themes. And there are some examples of the proposal well, at least the structure of it's kind of a little bit formal structure, but it's very, I would say, it's pretty straightforward and not that complicated. It needs to cover this pretty much what I said, that to show that it's international, that it's a more general topic, but otherwise there's yeah, it's not very difficult to, if you have very good idea about how you will organize it, it's not difficult to prepare. And from time, well, the success rate is very different from year to year because very different number of proposals were submitted. At some years, pretty much all of them were funded. At some years, it will be like 20% success. I don't know what will happen this year. I believe that it will be probably not that very harsh competition because many projects which were funded in the past, they still not spending their money because was no way to travel. So I think I would guess this time it will be not that much competition. So it's a very good time to do it.
All right. Any other updates? Well, hearing none and seeing no hands raised in the chat, I'll thank everybody for joining us today. Thanks especially to Bob for that excellent presentation. And thanks to Meredith and the staff for organizing the meeting today. So we'll send out information when we have the schedule or the agenda confirmed for our next Terrestrial Ecosystems team meeting. And until then, I wish you well, and thanks again. Great to see everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.